Media Newspaper Group, and I'd just like to welcome our sponsors up, Urban Assembly and New York City Charter Center. So if members would like to come up here and say a few words. Thank you.
Hi, good afternoon. On behalf of the New York City Charter School Center and the Urban Assembly, I want to welcome you to Manhattan Media's first mayoral forum on the future of education in New York City. Richard Kahan and I decided to sponsor this and co-sponsor together for one simple reason. We believe in collaboration, and we believe that collaboration among schools and stakeholders is necessary to move our schools forward. Teachers, leaders, students, parents, we're all hungry for an open, honest, searching conversation about what policies will lead to higher career achievement, more college readiness, and the ability of more students to participate meaningfully in our city and our society. We also believe deeply that if we take an all-hands-on-deck approach, and we understand that we need all kinds of schools, traditional district, charter, schools that are partnered with excellent organizations like Urban Assembly and other community-based organizations, that then we have a hope of living in a city where every child in every neighborhood has access to a high-quality public education. Thank you.
I'm Richard Kahn, and I'm the founder of the Urban Assembly, which is a 21-school network of public schools. First, I want to make it clear I'm speaking only for myself. My views are my views, and nobody else is being represented. I have a message which I think is of critical importance to the next mayor, and that is about the ongoing conflicts between supporters of charter schools and the supporters of non-charter schools, or district schools. Let me start with a few facts. Both charters and district schools are public schools. Both have experienced a significant number of successes and failures. Both are committed to the education of all children, with a particular emphasis on the disadvantaged, and both have strengths and weaknesses, and we can learn from each other. We don't know yet how to address all of the systemic challenges in our pursuit of equitable access to high-quality education. But we do know that this current charter, non-charter conversation isn't helping a single principal, a single teacher, a single parent, or a single student. The enormous amount of time and energy and money that's been focused on issues like lifting caps on the number of charter schools or co-locations, those issues are extraneous to the needs of the children we serve. We need to be focused collectively on the educational challenges they face. We need to avoid arguments about one form of school creation and management over another, and focus on school success. Neither charter nor district schools can do the job alone. Together, I think we have a chance.
So what we just heard was one perspective of many in a very, very contentious education policy debate that has gone on in the city for 12 years. And I think that debate is over over what the next mayor, who one of you is likely to be, will do to improve the city's schools. And so I'd like to, we have a very short time here today, and so I want to go right into things, and I'll introduce the candidates that we have here today. I'll start actually with Lindsay Christ, my co-moderator, who's not running for mayor. Next to her, we have City Council Speaker Christine Quinn, former Comptroller Bill Thompson, his successor as Comptroller John Liu, Tom Allen, the publisher of Manhattan Media, and public advocate Bill de Blasio.
So thank you all so much for coming. As Melissa said, we have a very short time period here and many panelists. So to make this as constructive and illuminating as possible, we've asked two things of the five of you. Try to be as concise as possible, and please forgive us when we inevitably cut in, as we probably will. Secondly, please keep your answers specific about the actions you would take and the policies you would implement. As mayor of the city, you will actually have the power to make these decisions when it comes to the schools. So that means we don't want to hear that parent engagement is good or class sizes should be smaller. We want to hear if and how you would do it. And we want you to be realistic, acknowledging the restraints of budget and collective bargaining. And we'd like you to tell us how your policies would be different than the others sitting up here with you on this panel, and either different or the same as the current administration, which is the only mayor we've had under mayoral control, and the only mayor we've had for a very long time. So it's a point of comparison that is quite relevant. Melissa.
And so while you digest all those instructions, we'll give you a question that is, I think we're looking for a yes or no answer here. Teachers Union President Michael Mulgrew has described the Bloomberg administration's school policies as causing a decade of disaster. Overall, do you think city schools are better than they were 10 years ago? And you have microphones on your table.
Sharing.
First of all, thank you, Melissa, thank you, Lindsay, all the sponsors, and especially to the many activists, advocates, parents who are here today. Thank you for everything you do to make our schools better. I don't think it's a yes or no. I just can't give you an easy yes or no. I think mayoral control education was a step forward. I think a lot of what's happened in the second and third terms of Mayor Bloomberg have been steps back. I think our school system is largely stalled right now, epitomized by the mayor's State of the City address, which was really an attack on teachers and a further lack of involvement and focus on parents and the crucial role they play. So I think we're stalled, and we need a very, very serious reset. And I say that as a public servant, and I say that as a public school parent myself. And I'm sure we'll get the opportunity to talk about our specific vision. But I would say a simple way of answering your question is we cannot continue the status quo that Mayor Bloomberg has created.
I think overall things are slightly better. The mayor has tried, and actually by his own admission in the Atlantic recently, has not succeeded. He said that his one regret is that the needle hasn't moved further, and I agree with him. He's undertaken the wrong path with breaking up schools into smaller schools. And what he's missed is the fundamental problem in education, which I'll be talking about today, which is that we're just not properly training teachers before they get into the classroom, and we're not giving them proper instruction once they are in the classroom and professional development. That is the fundamental problem in the city, it's the fundamental problem in this country, and everybody is missing the forest from the trees when we talk about teacher evaluation, mayoral control. Everything comes down to making sure that teachers are prepared before they walk into the classroom. We have to adopt the medical model of training of teachers. Doctors don't walk into an operating room unless they have 3 years of clinical training. The same should be true of teachers. They need 3 years in the classroom before they become full teachers. And that's going to be the first policy I'll implement.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you very much for joining us in this very important panel discussion. I want to thank Lindsay, I want to thank Melissa and my co-panelists for being here today. I think you can't say yes or no in response to this question. Some schools, I think, are better off. Other schools are not as well off. The policy changes that we have seen this past decade have had actually very mixed results. And in some ways, it's hard to measure whether things are better or not, even by looking at the statistics, because some of the benchmarks have been moved so many times. It's now comparing apples to oranges in too many of these cases. If I had my druthers, I'd do things very differently. I'd reduce the overemphasis on high-stakes exams. I'd actually engage and listen to parents a lot more often. And I'd also stop this co-location of schools that is really creating much more chaos and is actually contributing to the instruction of our kids. But overall, I think that there has been a great deal of discussion on high school graduation rates and college readiness. I think that's important. But I think for the 21st century, in order to keep New York City economically viable and competitive, we've got to retool our public schools, K through 12, and perhaps pre-K through 12, to get people ready to actually go to college and graduate from college. We've got to start looking at the college graduation statistics from the students that go through our public schools. And there are lots of ways that we can do that. I look forward to engaging in this discussion.
Well, let me thank our sponsors for today, as well as our moderators. Thank you both very much. You know, I think that, again, and not to be redundant, but it isn't a simple yes-no. The one thing I think we all can agree is that the promise of mayoral control has not been realized. All the accomplishments, the ability to move things faster and quicker, I don't think we've received the benefit of. There are so many things, you know, the focus on standardized testing. That is, in fact, we have kind of missed the forest for the trees. It is unfortunate that it has become about that, as opposed to our students focusing and teaching our students about comprehension and critical thinking. It isn't just enough to remember that 1 + 1 is 2. You have to remember the concepts, because then you can use them for other things. So I think that what we have seen is, you know, this focus and excessive focus on test taking. And what we're seeing is more and more of our graduates who are leaving high school who can't do college level work, who need remediation. And talk to the people at CUNY as we look at more and more of our students piling into community colleges because they need remediation, and remediation in more than one area, because unfortunately they're not learning it in the public schools. They're not being taught the way they should. So we need, in some ways, obviously strong curriculum, a focus on the future for our students so that they can either go into college when they graduate with the skills that they need, or in the end, go to the world of work with the work skills that they need to be able to succeed. And if that includes more career and technical education, then yes, we need to do that. But right now, the promise of mayoral control is not being realized by a long shot.
I guess to be redundant at this point, first let me thank both of our moderators and all of the sponsors and Fordham Law School for hosting us, and I think this isn't a yes or no answer. Clearly progress has been made, but not enough. We have seen the establishment of mayoral control, which we had never seen before, which is a good thing. And we've seen other progress made, particularly in having more special schools out there as choices. But if you look at the overall system, as I like to, one where we're really thinking more about lifelong learning, there needs to become a much greater focus on educating the child as a whole. How do you do that? You need to find ways to bring parents in a very real way. Right now, we hear far too often in all different neighborhoods in our city that parents don't feel like their voice is welcome. We have to change that. We also have to find a way to dial down the tone of the rhetoric and high volume as it relates to discussions with the teachers union. That isn't serving anyone well. It's only separating us. And we can't focus on a whole child if we're separated ourselves. We also have to move away from our over-focus on high-stake testing. It has gone, as others have said, too far and created a situation where it is much harder for teachers to be as creative as they would like to be in the classroom. And for a child who might not learn in the traditional way, having that level of attention on standardized testing significantly reduces or eliminates the moment where that child's mind might get captured, or a spark might get set off, and they'll really get down their path of learning and actually become engaged in the classroom. Comptroller Liu is also absolutely right. We aren't doing well as it relates to high school graduation level, but let's not stop with the bar there. Let's begin judging ourselves on college completion rate as well as workplace success. That's a much more appropriate bar for us to set, and we need to push harder to improve the high school graduation rate and the percentage of children who are reading at grade level.
Okay, so we clearly failed on our yes or no answer there, and our conciseness in terms of if we wanted one word. So we're going to try to move quicker going forward, since we're about halfway through the time we have, and we got the first question. So I wanted, in the second question, and this is the one question that we gave them maybe 2 hours of warning for, and I don't even know if you all got the message. But so we would like to ask you, now I'm going to give you 20 seconds each, instead of the 30 that I promised you 2 hours ago. 20 seconds to tell us one specific policy that in the first year that you were mayor, you would implement or change. And it doesn't have to be your most important policy, but just something you could get done quickly and would get done quickly. I guess let's start, let's maybe, well, the microphone, so we'll just start in the middle. Comptroller.
Thank you. We looked at the fact that only 1 out of 5 kids entering high school eventually graduate with a college degree. And that is pitiful. That is making the city of New York non-competitive relative to other major American cities, let alone other global cities in this world. So we've got to do much better. And after months of research, we found that a key ingredient to ensuring that more kids graduate from college after entering the public high schools is we have to get more guidance counselors out there. Right now, one guidance counselor has 259 kids. We've got to reduce that ratio to about 1 every 100 kids.
Thank you.
I will, in my 20 seconds, do 2 things that I would do. First, I think it is important that the next chancellor is an educator. That is number 1. So as the mayor, I make sure that the next chancellor is an educator. Second, I think it would be important to have an instant moratorium on school closings. Those 2 things, because at this point, I honestly don't believe that schools are being closed just because of, I think there are so many factors that are going into it, a moratorium on school closing, so we can develop different policies to help schools succeed.
We're going to get the rest of them later to answer both of those questions. Who would like to go next?
I'll jump in. Day 1, eliminate testing from grades 1st through 5. No more testing. Make science instruction and language instruction mandatory in elementary schools. If you don't test for it, you don't teach it, and those are going to be the most important things to make America competitive. We're in a global society. Language instruction is key, and kids can only learn before they're 11 years old language. And 2, we need science instruction. Number 2, make sure that every teacher, before they walk in the classroom, has at least 2 years of experience in the classroom. Otherwise, they're not fit to be teachers.
Well, you can't fix the schools if we don't get early childhood education and after school right. And I proposed about a month ago an upper income tax for 5 years so we could focus like a laser on universal pre-K, actual universal pre-K, full day for everyone who needs it, every child who needs it in New York City. So every child can actually have the possibility of getting into first grade at grade level, being ready to learn throughout, and enriching after-school programs to actually stretch the school day, provide additional instruction, and help kids get through. And I talked about that at the middle school level where so many kids are faltering. That's the kind of investment we need to make, or we're not serious about turning the corner with our school system. We don't get early childhood properly, if we don't actually extend after school to all who need it in a manner that teaches, we can't move the school system forward. One last point.
Nope, we gotta move on. Next. Speaker Clement.
Thank you. First, I think the next mayor has to change the tone. We have to stop vilifying teachers. The critical best thing we can do is uplift teachers and recognize that you can't have a successful classroom without having a successful teacher. And both sides of all of the education reform debate need to take it down a bunch of notches. I would also take immediate steps to reduce the amount of prep testing that we're doing, having tests to prepare for the test. That's eating up valuable classroom time where real learning can occur. Third, I think we need to put a kind of red flag early warning system in place for schools that are headed in the wrong direction. So before we get to the question of close, not close, we've intervened to try to get those schools onto the right track.
Okay, we're going to get to all of that actually soon. Melissa?
Mr. Thompson, you anticipated our next question. I think you may have taken a peek on your way in. As mayor, your biggest early decision will be who your chancellor is. The current mayor chose a manager and not an educator as his first chancellor, and that he drew fire for that even to this day. So, first two chancellors. My memory has been wiped. So the question for all of you is, do you think the next chancellor needs to be an educator, and would you choose somebody from the current Department of Education?
I think I already answered part of that, as far as I believe that it needs to be, that person, next chancellor, needs to be an educator. I honestly believe that instead of Joel Klein, there should have been an educator that was named as chancellor. That said, you don't want to exclude anybody, but I think it is important, and I think it would be important for the next mayor to make the statement that they go outside of that system, that they go and try and get the best and the brightest. So I think it is important. I'm not going to say that I would exclude everybody definitely from the Department of Education. However, I think that the policies that have been put forward in the current Department of Education have not helped our children, and I think we have to look outside to find your next chancellor.
Definitely an educator, not necessarily from the DOE, but maybe from the DOE. And also with a serious public screening. Kathy Black was pushed down our throat because of mayoral control gone to an undemocratic level. No one said mayoral control meant a mayoral, narrow inability to communicate, to give the public a role, to air ideas and decisions before they were made. We need a more democratic, small d democratic version of mayoral control, and we need a chancellor who is presented to the public, not just forced down the throat.
I'll go a step further. There's a short list that I've already put together. Eric Nadelstern, who is Deputy Chancellor under Joel Klein, was a very intelligent person I think we should look at. Jennifer Rabb, the president of Hunter College, has done an amazing job at Hunter, and I think she should be looked at closely. Linda Darling Hammond, who's a great educator at Stanford, has to be looked at. And John White, who's also at DOE. Those four would be on my short list, and I think we have to look at all those four people.
That is an eclectic mix.
Yes, I think at least one of those choices is very questionable. I won't say anything, but I would say that I have a short list also, but I'm not going to say them now. I think that there's nothing wrong with many of the lifelong educators at the Department of Education that we have right now. There are some really committed and professional and experienced people that we could draw from. And what we need to do is, of course, continue some of the accountability measures, but also engage the public more in terms of what the schools need, what communities need, what families and parents need. And I think there's a wealth of talent already at the New York State Department of Education that we can think of.
So would you choose somebody from internally?
I would. That's not to say that I would not consider anybody from outside, but I think there's a tremendous amount of
And
talent
yes,
right
definitely
now.
an educator or not?
Yes, an educator, somebody who is an experienced and committed educator.
I'm not going to rule anybody out at all because they're part of the Department of Education. As John said, there's a lot of terrific folks out there, principals, network leaders, superintendents who are part of our school system, and I'm proud of them. The fact that they're a part of our Department of Education is a good thing. It means they've committed their lives to educating the children of the city of New York, and people deserve credit for that. So the fact that you've worked under any particular mayor shouldn't rule you out. What you're working for is the children of the city of New York. So working for the Department of Education would neither get you the job nor not get you the job. On the issue of whether it would have to be an educator, I think the example of Jennifer Rabb is a fascinating one. Because Jennifer's done an amazing a home run job, in my opinion, at Hunter. She had no educational experience before getting that job. She was actually head of the Landmarks Preservation Commission for Rudy Giuliani. So if we said only an educator, Jennifer would never have become president of that school, and she's done a great job. So I think you need somebody with educational experience, educational know-how, but I don't want to rule people out who might have different types of experiences, like running large educational not-for-profits or things of that nature. I don't want to limit us. As Bill said, let's have a full debate with all of the good candidates that want to put their names forward.
So one of your first responsibilities as mayor would be to negotiate a new contract, assuming that one doesn't happen in the next year, which seems unlikely, with the teachers union. Many other urban districts recently have negotiated new contracts that include some sort of merit pay for teachers and some sort of limits on tenure. In New York City, Mayor Bloomberg has come out and pushed for both of those policies. The teachers union has come out against both of those policies. We'd like to know whether you'd support merit pay and put limits on tenure. We'd like to start with the public advocate, who said last year, quote, "Those who don't teach well over a period of time need to leave." So you said those who don't teach well over a period of time need to leave.
You're a good reporter. Okay, first, merit pay. Look, we've all seen what happened in Newark the last few days. I commend Cory Booker for working with his teachers union in a constructive manner to get to an outcome. And the piece of that outcome I am interested in is the focus on additional incentives to get teachers where they're needed most in schools that need the help, and additional incentives to get teachers teaching in the subjects we need the most here in this city and all over this country, such as math and science. I'm not sold on merit pay as a pure incentive across the board, as opposed to targeting it to those kind of specific needs. I think that the jury is certainly out on that. On the question of tenure, I think we've seen some serious and constructive progress. I certainly think we saw it in the state's new evaluation policy on the notion that we want to, in the first years, assess whether a teacher has what it takes to go the long haul, and then make sure we are providing the support so they can succeed if they do. And if not, we want a ready mechanism to make sure they choose a different kind of profession. I think what's happening at the state is the step in the right direction. The same thing, to get to a usable policy, it has to be done in coordination with the teachers union as partners.
I'm firmly in favor of merit pay, but more importantly, I think there needs to be a career track for teachers. There's a school out in Brooklyn called the New American Academy that has a 4-tiered track. Apprentice teachers up to master teachers. Master teachers make $125,000 in that school, and they mentor the other teachers. They work in teams of 4. That is a system that we have to look at very carefully, because what teachers need is mentoring and professional development once they get in the classroom. I was a teacher 25 years ago at Stuyvesant High School for 2 years, and I was very lucky that I met a man named Frank McCourt the first day that I was there, and he took me under his wing, and he made me a better teacher. I wasn't a great teacher, but I was a better teacher. That's exactly what we need. We need mentor teachers, master teachers to help teachers along. 50% of teachers leave the profession within 5 years. That's a disaster. Any profession that had that kind of turnover would be sued for malpractice. We have to make sure teachers stay in the system, and we have to help them.
What would you do as a parent?
I would weaken the rules on tenure.
I think we have to remember why tenure came into being in the first place, and that was at a time when teachers were being pulled into the political process way too much. So some form of tenure should be retained. As far as merit pay goes, I don't think that teachers are opposed to merit pay. I think it's a question of how you measure merit. And you look at, we just went through months of this public discussion where we asked the question of whether teacher evaluation should be made public. And at the end of the day, it was made public in some form or another. But we're looking at evaluations that have 40 to 50% margins of error. I mean, those kinds of margins of error render these evaluations meaningless, and yet the public and some of the editorial boards were demanding that they be made public, even though they were meaningless to begin with. So it's a matter of how you define merit. It's a matter of how you negotiate with the teachers union to find a program that actually makes sense, as opposed to starting right off the bat by demonizing teachers for ostensibly opposing
How
merit
would you
pay.
define merit then?
Listen, there are lots of, the teachers have certain ways of defining merit. It's not going to be based on these evaluations that are so rooted in the numbers and yet at the end of the day have such large statistical aberrations. The teachers themselves, and I've spoken with hundreds of them, they're the first ones to say they don't want bad teachers among their peers. They're the ones who first say, will be the first to say that we need to get rid of the bad teachers or people who are not meant for this profession. But that doesn't mean that you start these negotiations or discussions by, as Bill mentioned, in your State of the City speech, demonizing teachers and blaming them for all the ills that are in our public schools.
So you're not against potentially changing tenure, but you want to keep it in some form, and you're not against some form of merit pay?
You have to have some form of tenure to protect against the politicization.
But some form means that you might potentially get for changes.
Yes.
You know, I don't want to take anything off the table, but let's be aware of one thing. New York City, over a period of years, has engaged in different opportunities at merit pay. And it really hasn't been shown that it has worked dramatically. You're going to so I said, I don't want to take anything off the table, but you've done other experiments that haven't been shown conclusively to improve academic achievement. Our children don't necessarily do better. If you're going to look at merit pay, you want to look at it perhaps on an individual basis, but you've got to look at it on a collective basis, because the one thing that is true is that education is collaborative in a number of ways. And the schools that do better are the schools that have individuals who work together, with one teacher working to help improve another teacher. So, not taking off the table, but it isn't the great, solution to public education. I didn't say I wouldn't push it. It's not the great solution in the end to public education. It is, in fact, setting standards high. It's holding people and teachers accountable. And if you want to talk about holding people accountable, no, tenure is one way to hold people accountable. So you'd want to make sure that teachers, it isn't something that's automatically granted, and we're seeing that right now, that tenure isn't automatically granted. And that over a period of time, you want to work. I would say that one of the things, though, that needs to be changed is the support given to teachers. Teachers leave, as just pointed out. So many of them leave in their first 5 years because they don't receive the support that they need. They don't have, they just don't have the professional development and support that they need to be able to leave. And so many of them leave after they basically felt that they've drowned, and they leave feeling as if they failed.
You feel that the tenure is not automatically granted?
I'd say that the tenure should automatically be granted. In the end, there are teachers, there are individuals who shouldn't have tenure because they shouldn't be teachers. But I think we want to work first to provide the supports that they need to be able to stay, and that doesn't occur right now. That doesn't occur.
Thank you. First, I think Newark really does deserve to be heralded, because the agreement that they came out with, which is one where obviously Mayor's Office, the union, and philanthropic entities all came to the table and came with very limited public rancor to an agreement everybody came to, is a model, forget the substance even for a second, it's just a model of behavior and process that all of us across the country should really try to emulate. Within that Newark plan is a real focus, in addition to other merit pay examples, of giving teachers who are willing to go and stay at low-performing schools or in tougher subjects more money. That is absolutely a proposal or an idea that I support. It's actually something that our middle school task force and the city council articulated back in 2007, and a proposal I put out in my 2008 State of the City speech. In that case, that teachers who are willing to go and stay at lower performing middle schools should make more money than other teachers. As Bill said, there are real examples of grades and subjects that it is just harder to get teachers to go to and stay at. That is a proposal I think we should push for and work to implement. Overall, kind of broad-based merit pay, you get a higher score than I do, you make more money than I do, is not something I'm comfortable with at this moment in time. Again, things can change, there can be new data, new experiences, but I think a significant amount of the data we have seen shows that that doesn't really lead to higher educational performance. Why? Because that's not what drives a teacher, isn't money. Teachers didn't enter teaching to make money, and they're not working on commission. They're working to try to educate children, and I think that idea broadly just doesn't fit into what drives teachers. On the area of tenure, I was trying to beat you before you could say you cut me off. We have made changes in the area. If you look at the state's evaluation law, it says that any teacher who is evaluated poorly 2 years in a row loses tenure. That's a good, strong kind of stick, if you will, out there for teachers to say, if you've done poorly 2 years in a row, you're going to lose your job. Now that needs to occur with mentoring and support. You see that in the Newark model, a focus on bringing up those percentage of teachers who aren't doing well, and just generally supporting teachers who might be succeeding in test scores, but having a tough time also.
So you think if the teacher evaluation system is put in place in the city, which it hasn't been yet, then that would be a good curb on tenure, or a good change for...
I think it's an absolute step forward in making sure that teachers who shouldn't be teaching, for whatever reason, aren't teaching. And nobody wants to have teachers who can't teach in the classroom.
And teachers are not opposed to a teacher evaluation system.
I just want to mention one thing about the state's evaluation law, which is that it doesn't actually say that teachers who get low ratings for 2 years will lose tenure, but it says that teachers who get low ratings for 2 years in a row, their districts may initiate the process to strip them of tenure.
Sure.
Would you commit to doing that for anybody who received 2 years of consecutive low ratings?
To purge their districts and with that, absolutely. Absolutely. I think that is the intent. You're absolutely right, I shorthanded it, but I think that is the intent and spirit of the law, yes.
Thank you. And you mentioned a moment ago public rancor. I want to bring up something that has elicited a lot of rancor in the last decade, and that's the Bloomberg administration's practice of allowing charter schools to operate rent-free inside public school buildings. Speaker Quinn, you in the past praised that practice when speaking to charter school advocates, and we found out this afternoon what Controller Liu thinks about that. He would stop the practice. I'd love to hear from the rest of you, would you continue that practice? And if so, would you attach any conditions to the leases?
Can I just jump in once again? I'm not sure praised is the right word. I don't think we should stop co-locations, neither for charters in districts or districts in districts. The model of charter schools simply can't continue if they have to pay rent. And charters, not a significant part, but part of our system. That said, if you look at co-location, and this is true with districts and districts, but more with charters and districts, proponents of charters think the system is broken of co-locations, and opponents of charters think the system of co-location is broken. When both sides disagree, you need to change the process, make it clearer, more transparent, more clear when schools are going to get moved in and what that means for the whole school community. I wouldn't stop the process, but I do think you need to make changes in it. There's a lot of comments I've made on the record about that as well.
I think you need to make profound changes in it. I think parents, part of why you feel such a disconnect between parents and DOE right now is that their opinions have been ignored. Parents' opinions have been ignored on high-stakes testing, they've been ignored on co-locations, they've been ignored on a host of things that affect their children, where there is the time to get their viewpoint and act on it. The co-location situation, and many of the closures as well, is based on a model of ramming everything through, giving no real role to the CEC, no real role to the PEP. It's not democratic. And parents rightfully feel if their voices don't matter, I've heard this from more parents than I could possibly count. If their voices don't matter, why are they even bothering to try to play a productive role in the school system? The actual model we need is one of a high level of parent engagement at all points in the process, from doing the homework with their children to being on the PTA, you name it. But that only works if parents are shown that their input actually has a result. If a co-location is a bad plan, and parents point out why it's not going to work in practice, they need to see that plan change to know that there's actually a functioning democracy around here. So there's so many things that have to be unraveled. And a lot of parents understandably equate mayoral control with an extraordinarily undemocratic dynamic. It does not have to be that way. And we won't get the best out of parents, we won't get the best out of schools until we change that.
You know, co-location now, and you go into schools, or so many schools, where it appears as if the charter side of the school, or the portion of the school, has new equipment, it's bright, it's airy, it's been painted, and you go to the other side, and the public side, and it's dingy, the children feel as if they're second-class citizens. We've got to do, I'm not, as I said, I think charter schools play a valuable role, but I think in co-location, we need to do this much better. There are also parents who believe that their public schools are being allowed to fail. Allowed to fail so that a charter school can be located there. We can't allow that. That can't continue, and which is why I talk about a moratorium right off the bat for closing of schools. That's important. So when it comes to that, and one last point, I'm not sure, and it is not as if charters are not an important part of the public system, but at the same point, the conversation about public education tends at times to be lost between charter and non-charter, where there are, 50,000 children in charter schools right now? What about the other 1 million children? So the conversation becomes about that. People get lost in the argument back and forth about it, and they forget, wait a minute, there's still 1 million children on the other side that we have to focus on. We need to do this much better and differently.
So would you allow new charter schools to move into public school buildings?
Having to be done very differently. Having to be done in the sense first that it isn't because the school failed, and also we've got to have some equality, some equity between the charter side of a building or portion of a building, and that includes lunchroom, and that includes in the times there, as well as use of the gymnasium and so many other things. It has to be done fairly and equitably. So I'm not against new charter schools and locating the schools, but we have to do this differently. It has to be a different conversation. I will agree with Bill, and that has to be done so that parents and the larger community is involved in that discussion.
Is involved, or there's been a proposal out there that elected parent councils would get to make the final determination about whether a charter school would move in. Would you support that policy?
I don't know that I'm going to say that I'm going to let the elected parent councils make the final decision, but I think they need to be involved in a collaborative discussion about what goes into a school.
Charter schools are public schools, and they were started as laboratories for reform to improve public schools. And I think we've lost sight of that original function. Charter schools are supposed to allow educators, principals, and others to experiment and innovate. And I think many of them have done that around the country and in the city. And obviously there's great charter schools and there's bad charter schools, just like there's great public schools and bad charter schools. So let's not lose sight of the fact that charters were done as a way to innovate. And when you put them in the same building with the public school, you have to make sure that the principals in that school work together, that it's not a zero-sum game, that if there's fundraising that's done just for the charter school, there has to be, as I think Bill said, an equitable way to divide up. You know, when there are 4 high schools in a building, for example, on the Upper West Side, I helped create one called Franklin Court High School. Those 4 principals work together. They have a common basketball team, a common after-school program. That's how you make sure schools work, and that's what has to happen in charter schools and public schools. They have to work together. They're not opponents. They're in the same game.
Early on, I called for a moratorium on co-locations as well as school closures. Not forever, but until there's a clear, transparent, and comprehensible process in place, which right now there isn't. Tom mentions a school where I guess 4 principals are collaborating very closely together. Unfortunately, I think that that's the exception rather than the rule. Too often, we hear of new co-locations that are going to take place. The CEC has to hold a hearing, has to take a vote on these co-locations or closures, and many times the CEC members themselves tell me directly that they just got the information right before the meeting began. So that's clearly a process that is broken. It has to be fixed. And when you look at the amount of friction that these co-locations are creating, it is just so disruptive to the educational process of the kids in the new charter school, the kids in the existing school in that same building. It's a process that I believe is a shell game. It's a 3-card Monte with our public school kids, and they deserve better.
But it also, the example that Tom gave, the Brandeis complex, where the McCourt High School is. McCourt is an incredibly promising program, and it needs to grow fully. Parents in Manhattan, parents all over the city want quality high school options. McCourt, in part, is echoing Beacon High School, which has been a tremendous success. But this current DOE decided to bring in a charter and disrupt the possibility of the McCourt High School growing to its full size in the Brandeis complex. I fought that decision because I thought it was absolutely without any reference to parents and communities, but I also thought it was bad educational policy because we had a successful high school model that parents were clamoring for, and it was being limited before their very eyes.
Bill raises also a good point, which is the Bloomberg model of breaking up schools into small high schools was based on Gates money, Gates Foundation money. Bill Gates now discredits that his own policy. 400 people in a high school as a cookie cutter is a mistake. When I founded Frank McCourt High School with Gail Brewer, we wanted to have 800 seats in that school because if you want a great high school, you have to have after-school programs, you have to have AP classes, and 400 kids is just not enough. So the Bloomberg model of small high schools is a failure, and I think it was a big mistake. And when you break up these schools, and you have 4 principals and 4 assistant principals and 4 guidance counselors, there's more costs that don't go into the classroom. We need to pay teachers more. We need to put all of our money into the classroom, not into administrators. And that was, I think, one of the failings of this administration.
I just want to just add, I mean, like, one of the things you said, we're all 4 principals working together. We can't miss this whole debate, and we haven't talked about it much tonight, the significance of a good principal. I actually think, John, there are lots of examples out there of principals working together in school buildings, you know, district and charters, because they care about the children in their schools. One of the things the next mayor has to focus on aggressively, and our principals union has a great model, are programs we can use to help principals learn the skills they need to know. When you become a principal, you're now in charge of an entire school budget. You may not have those type of skills, but there are easy ways to help you learn them. And one of the most important things to a successful school and a successful school community in a building like that are good principles. And we need to invest further in professional developments, in the training institutes we have to help those great educators who've been great teachers become great principals, because that will make all the difference in the world.
So you both brought up 2 other major topics that we are not going to get to tonight, which are the small school movement, which we talk about co-locations. You're asking about charters. There's actually many schools that are co-located with the public schools, and the training of principals and teachers, which has come up briefly, but quickly because we are really running out of time, and so this actually has to be quicker than I'd like it to be. Lowering class size is consistently the parents' #1 priority when it comes to the DOE's own survey, and it's actually also one of the very most expensive things you can do. So again, I think it's very easy for everyone here, probably for everyone, to say that lowering class size is something you'd like to do. I'd like to know from each of you, and starting with the comptroller, because he is the comptroller. We're talking about something very expensive. How would you actually make this a priority, and how would you pay for it? And that's a really big question when I'm asking you to speak quickly.
I certainly would make it a priority. I'm proud to be a product of New York City Public Schools, kindergarten through 12th grade. My wife is. Our son is now in the 7th grade, and class size does matter. And if you think about how we can pay for it, I think some of the space issues will continue to be a problem. We've got lots of teachers that are available, but they're not being utilized. And so, the idea of decreasing class sizes and introducing costs to the Department of Education is a false choice. And I think we can reduce class sizes in a meaningful way without adding significantly to the budget of the deal.
I think, listen, you can't be all things to all people, and obviously reducing class sizes in a system of 1.1 million kids is an impossibility in a tough fiscal time. However, you can prioritize. First and second grade, which are probably the 2 most crucial grades for kids to learn, you can reduce class sizes to below 20 kids in those grades. I would start with that. I would add language instruction and science instruction to make sure that kids get enough instruction at that age. If it takes in second grade, it's a lot easier to educate kids in 3 through 12. So I would prioritize first and second grade, small class sizes, just like private schools.
Hate to sound redundant again, but smaller class size, particularly in early grades, the only thing I would say is we're looking at, at that point, kindergarten through 3rd grade, because I think a lot of your studies have always shown if students perform on grade level by the time they reach the 3rd grade, if they read on level by the time they reach the 3rd grade, including the 3rd grade, they will do better throughout the rest of their school careers, and we won't wind up almost chasing them trying to get and help them bring them up to grade level. So I would say the grades kindergarten through third grade, it allows you to prioritize and focus your dollars. You may not be able to do it system-wide, and in a lot of ways you can't, even though as you get into other grades, you can create situations for students who need more time on task. So whether that's extended day, whether that's working so many other ways, whether that is even bringing class students in smaller groups on a Saturday. You know, that becomes important to be able to create that type of focus for students who need more time on task, but definitely K through 3.
Parents intensely want us to lower class size. I've seen with my 2 children the difference from the years when they had bigger class size versus the years when they had lower class size. It's tangible and it's profound the impact it makes. I think what I would say is it's a priority. You fund it as much as possible, even in tough times, by finding the savings that are there to be found in the DOE, which is in large measure by undoing some of the Bloomberg era approaches and the obsession with hiring outside consultants, et cetera, that cost us hundreds of millions of dollars. So there's some savings to be found there, but I think you also empower the same concern that parents have about class size is the concern about starting too late. We've got to get to early child education and universal pre-K that's really universal. I think we need outside resources, an upper income tax to achieve a real focus on early childhood. That sets up a dynamic where we can then try and keep bringing down class size at the early years and beyond.
We have to do what we can to reduce class size, recognizing that given the fiscal situation we're in, we're not going to be able to do it across the system overnight. And exactly the right place to start is by focusing on pre-K through third grade. Getting class sizes down there will make the most fundamental difference as it relates to literacy and children being on grade level and being ready to succeed. But the other thing that we need to do, because what I don't want to do is come out of the recession and be at a moment in the budget where we have more resources and then figure out we have to plan to find the space for the additional classrooms. Right now, when we are at a time where we have less money, we should also engage in the long-term planning process. Really figure out what is the grade level, the class size level we think classes should be at. Look at the census level. Look at the Department of Health birth certificate numbers. Plan out with some degree of specificity where those children would be and where we would need to build new schools. So when we have the money, we can immediately begin spending it and not have to spend the 2 years then doing the planning when we've lost the potential and the momentum. I also agree with Bill. That's not to say we don't have resources right now. When we delve into the budget of the Department of Education, we are without a doubt going to find money in contracts that are good and money in contracts that are simply not necessary, not critical at all. Pull that money out, redirect it into the classroom, and it is going to help us hire more teachers who can help us bring class sizes down. I would also say, in addition to pre-K through 3, I think I would then prioritize teachers who are engaged in English language learning classes. Those are places where smaller class size could also make a big difference in children excelling more quickly.
I think we are pretty much out of time here, but I want to try just one more time to ask a question that will elicit a brief answer. This is an either or, so it's a little more expansive than yes or no. A year and a half into the next mayor's term, the law giving control over the city schools to the mayor is going to be up for renewal. Will you go to Albany to ask for your own power to be limited, or would you ask for the law to remain exactly the same?
I believe, look, I was a community school board member in Brooklyn, District 15, before mayoral control. And what was good about the old system was that parents could actually participate in decision-making in a real way. If you want to talk to the most important person in your district, or the superintendent, you can go right to them and talk to them. You can have input. So what I would say is, yes, we need mayoral control, but we need a more democratic version of mayoral control. I would go to Albany and say, renew mayoral control, because that's how we can keep moving our schools forward on things like early childhood education and after school. And of course, the voters, the citizens, have the accountability mechanism. But let's give the CECs a meaningful role in co-locations, opening and closings of schools, in the same style, for example, that community boards have in the land use process. It's a serious role that has a real impact on the outcome. Let's make the PEP a place of real debate, not a kangaroo court, not a rubber stamp, a place where there's a real debate over issues, even if the mayor ultimately has a decision with the chancellor in the end. Why don't we air these complicated issues and give the public a chance to weigh in before locking down things that affect the lives of our kids?
You know, I would go to Albany and ask for the same kind of renewal I asked for the last time that this question was before the state legislature. So it takes legislators. You know, there is I guess, a misbelief that mayoral control is municipal control. It's not. The chief executive is the mayor, and the legislative body is the state legislature. The council basically can legislate up to the door of the school. I'm simplifying it, but what happens in the school is in the hands of the state legislature. We have an enormous problem with parents feeling they don't have a voice in schools and they can't be heard. Mayoral control should be renewed with the Department of Education as a full city agency. So the legislative body would be the city council. Then, if a parent had a problem and they had an issue and they couldn't get it heard by their principal or their CEC or whatever, they're not going to have to go to Albany and talk to some senator from Onondaga County who really has no sense of what's going on at PS 11 in Chelsea. They can just get on the subway and go down to City Hall and take it up with a legislative body that is directly connected to that issue. That would also make the Department of Education a full city agency. And it is not insignificant that it would then put the Department of Education's budget on the same fiscal management system as every other city agency. And trust me, that would be illuminating like the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree and make it much easier to find those funds that we need to fund the extra teachers we need to drive down class size.
Mayoral control, just like testing and teacher evaluations, is a red herring. It's a waste of time to discuss. If we get the right teachers in the classroom and we make schools about the teachers, parents, and students, and we keep the politicians the hell out of the classrooms, then mayoral control will become academic. Albany will realize that when there's a mayor in charge who actually understands education and not data and tests, then mayoral control will be a natural to approve again. And that's what we need, somebody who understands education and understands this, what happens in the classroom between a teacher, a student, and the parent involved at night, making sure that student does the work and works with the teacher. And so mayoral control will become academic because we'll have somebody in charge when I'm mayor who understands education.
So if mayoral control is academic, does that mean you would give up lots of control?
It's not about mayoral control. It's about somebody who understands, who appoints a chancellor, who understands that it's about what teacher you put inside the classroom and how you empower those teachers and how you professionally develop them. Everything else is academic. It's all commentary.
As a member of the City Council 10, 11 years ago, when the first form of mayoral control was enacted, I supported it. But like Tom said, it was not about control. It was actually about accountability, that the buck's supposed to stop with the mayor and that the mayor is supposed to be responsible for the success or responsible for the failure of the schools. It was about accountability, not control. Somehow in the interim, it morphed into this ridiculous system of control where the mayor and the Department of Education didn't have to answer to the city council. When convenient, they didn't answer to the state legislature because they said they had to answer to the city council. And they certainly were not listening to parents and the general public. So the whole idea of control, I don't think that was the original intent of it to begin with. It was supposed to be accountability. And to the extent that when it comes up for renewal in 2015, that the law can be modified to better reflect accountability, that's something that I would support, whether I'm in that office or not. It's something that's good for the public, because that's what it was supposed to be from the get-go, about accountability and not just about outright control.
As the former president of the New York City Board of Education, I think I can say, and particularly having worked also under mayoral system or worked along with a system of mayoral control, I think I've seen, as they would say, the good, the bad, and the ugly. I think it is, as mayor, I'd like to see mayoral control continued. But again, as I pointed out on a number of occasions, it is a question of who the mayor is. Mayoral control is supposed to be about collaboration and strong leadership. It's supposed to be about hearing voices from a number of different constituencies, but being able to move forward quickly and not being paralyzed. It would be good to see a system where we had superintendents again in local areas who in fact the principal spoke to and reported to. Right now, there is no place for parents to go when they disagree. Where do they go? Either the local school, if you don't get satisfaction there, there's no place for them to go. And I can ask around this room, and this is a room of smart people, what are the goals for the education system this school year? What are they trying to achieve? What are they trying to accomplish? And I don't know that anybody can tell me, other than higher test scores, a lower dropout rate, and a higher graduation rate. That's not satisfactory. Mayoral control is supposed to be about the discussions that we have with parents and with the city, and the mayor being transparent and open about that, and then leading along with the chancellor. That's what it's supposed to be about. So I support mayoral control. I think there have to be some tweaks. I've recommended them in the past when it was up for reauthorization before. But again, the law is one thing. It still is about who the mayor is and what that person believes in.
And on that note, who the mayor is and what that person believes in, we hope tonight has helped illuminate a little bit more on the education policies. We thank you all for coming, and we'll be